Dead Man Talking. Tonight's story is a fantastic spine-chilling encounter in a deep dark forest. As ever, I hope you guys enjoyed this one as much as I. Please do let me know down below in the comments what you thought. Please do like and share, it really does help build the channel and our community further. And of course, don't forget to hashtag TeamFEAR. And so, without further ado, let's get into tonight's story, entitled My Encounter in the Forest. Let's get straight into that. I begin this tale now with the full knowledge that I may not be able to finish it. I have hidden myself in a church, for I feel it cannot enter here. But even as I think this, I can hear it, skittering over stone surfaces, tapping on the walls, tap, tap, tap. And as I hear these clicks, which sends shivers through my very marrow, I know I am not long for this world. I shall be brief then, but where to begin? With my name? That is of no importance. Everyone has a name, and most of them the same, all of them meaning nothing. Let me instead say what I was, a renowned professor of folklore and mythology at the renowned Scarborough Institute. It was in my very nature to examine the odd, the weird, the unnatural, for the purpose of cutting it down to its simplest, most meaningless form, a fact. These facts I would soak in conjecture and publish to some acclaim in the academic press. Therefore, when word crossed my desk that the Slavic Studies Department secured a grant to create a study abroad program in the Carpathian Mountains, I was quite excited to visit. The Carpathians had always fascinated me, ever since, as a young girl, I first unearthed the tale of Count Dracula by Bram Stoker. And though I had done research across all variety of nations and lands, from the East Asian rice paddies to the hills of Kentucky, never once had I strayed into those mythic mountains. I knew nothing of their folk tales, their myths, their local history. All of this, then, I would deconstruct like a boy who pins butterflies. The thought excited me to no end. The trip began pleasantly enough. We were 16 in number then, though I shudder to think of it now. Since I am hardly a gregarious person, I knew but a few of their names, and yet despite this, their faces shall haunt me for eternity. All of us procured seats upon a plane bound for Budapest, and from there to a village in Erskro. The others were loud and jubilant, but I ignored them altogether. I cared not for them, only for the place itself, and with its odd, diverse people and alien traditions. The hours passed by idly on that flight. If I had known then what I know now, I would have cast myself in some manner from the aircraft the moment we were high enough to ensure my death. But as it were, the flight was without incident, and we soon took an uncomfortably banal bus trip to the small backwoods hamlet of Erskro. A lonely place, a desolate place, a land in which bleak despair had fused itself so inescurably from the landscape that no one could bear to look at the settings without feeling the bite of its grim maw. It was a city of inns, farms, and not much else. Some businesses had been in the families for generations, perhaps longer. One got the feeling that this place hadn't seen significant change since the great mastodons and mammoths had frequented these bitter pines. The people gave us sallow-eyed waxen looks as if they were animate corpses, the look of any person who has lived long in both extreme poverty and extreme fear. The town bordered a dense mountain forest, and yet, as we drove by on a flat, dusty road, I saw no evidence of logging or lumber camps. Throughout our first week in town, we heard no one speak of the gargantuan taiga, nor saw anyone venture into the dense, shadowy sprawl. And when one of the faculty inquired as to why this was the case, the villager she interviewed became strangely animated, threatening physical violence in his choppy, staccato tongue, should she dare to speak of these woods. All staff members were henceforth discouraged from mentioning the place, but my interest now was piqued. The fervour with which this man had accosted my colleague was the type brought on only by some sort of ancestral fear. by a lie born of truth, and then being repeated so oft that two became indistinguishable. And with this, then, I resolved I would discover for myself the reason for the ancestral apprehension with which the townsfolk viewed the wood. The sabbatical meandered on, the land deal was cemented, and an area only 40 minutes from Budapest was purchased for the university. My fellow faculty became accustomed to the natives' way of life, their foreign tongue, their tasteless food. But I was far from satisfied, for despite my discerning eye for detail, the forest and the fear of it remained as opaque to me as the day I first arrived. I did not share the fascination of my academic brethren for seeing these native people about their work. Their culture did not mystify nor entice me. I find that all people are generally the same, much as all horses are generally the same. The distinctions are evident only to one who sees a single tree in the forest. Very similar, very bland, very uninteresting. I sought something more, something preternatural. I sought knowledge that would reshape my narrow field. I found it, of course, to my undying regret. If I knew to what extent these horrors would warp the meagre mind that sought to know them, I would never have left my den. One night I heard some local storytellers surrounding a campfire, their lined and weathered faces racked with urgency as they relayed their stories to the wide-eyed youngsters. I spoke the native dialect, but poorly, and so I found Professor of Word Languages and beseeched him to translate for me. He did so quietly from afar, as not to disturb the natural flow of the speaker's tale, and what a tale it was. He spoke of a group of ancients who peopled these hills long before even their forefathers had even dreamed of a fire. Strange folk who worshipped equally strange deities. One of these deities, whom my colleague described as Flesh Melder, was the most powerful of them. And to appease this surreal titan, the savage people sacrificed living children like firewood to feed its desire for bloodlust. No accurate description of the thing could be given, for it was said to be flesh, but not flesh of the earth. Then the Mongols rode in. Even the greatest sorcerers and warriors of the savage mountain gods were slaughtered in battle, and the hungry horde proceeded to sack the town. The Mongols hung the last high priest, the Flesh Melder, from the arbors of the forest with his own guts. While he hung, the priest levied a horrific curse on them. This savage beast, who was more than a beast, would come for all of them to avenge the priest's wrongful death. This did not deter the savages from their spot, and they hung the old man as they would any other. However, the next morning, 20 Mongols were found dead, with the 20 steeds in a pile of bloody viscera and stinking flesh. The rest of the hordes feared it was native retribution, but found no men alive capable of doing this deed. They ran off into the forest to oust whatever thing had done this. The only ones who returned were mad. So this was the reason that no man would venture into the tranquil trees. Flesh Melder. Ha! But even as I scoffed, my curiosity was more inflamed than ever. What was described here by this old man was a battle, a conflict completely lost to the annals of history. Most myths and legends, I have found, are based at least partially in truth. The crimes and murders of old twisted into the fantasies of the new. What if I, a humble professor of old stories, were to uncover a great historical conflict and present it to the world? I would be a colossus of both legend and history. The great Rhodian academic who would unite two diametrically opposed fields in one great discovery. Publishing just one book would provide me with enough money to live comfortably off for a decade. But first, I must prove there was some truth to this myth. That is more than just a tired twist of the tongue meant to force children to clean their rooms. I tried to find someone in the town with a car who would be willing to take me out into the forest, but I came up empty-handed. Even when I offered them triple the price of any reasonable fare, I got nothing. And so, as any apt explorer must, I took matters into my own hands. Late one night, when I was sure no one would bother me or impede my progress, I stole out down one of the poorly kept forest trails into the inky blackness of the pine barrens. It seemed perhaps an unreasonable gamble, but not to me. Not then. Some sort of mania had taken possession of my senses, and I knew then, in the atrophied part of my brain not well suited for logic, that I must find this place. The cool night temperature was still just above freezing, and wolves could be heard howling throughout the misty mountain timbers. I clutched a .38 caliber revolver I had purchased some weeks back when the baying beasts had grown too loud. Surely I could frighten them off with a few shots, couldn't I? It was bitter cold, and the wind whipped my face. The tops of my cheeks went numb as if by Novocaine, and the rest of my face became as stiff as a mask. Eyes glinted from shrubbery, staring at me with ravenous hunger. And just as I was beginning to relinquish hope of ever locating any mystical battlefield, I heard a muffled raven's caw. I turned to look for the source of the noise, and in doing so lost my footing, tumbling down a gulch. I pulled myself up from the muck and then examined my surroundings. I was in a giant crater surrounded by the dead. Their bones were clad in leather and studded armor, with their withered fingers reaching desperately at the clay walls of this chasm, their tomb. The empty eye sockets still somehow seemed to plead with me, their discoverer, for mercy. These bleached and muddy bones were like flies in amber, an eternal testament to the suffering of the damned. Then there was the loud cawing again. The raven landed on a human skull and was cawing belligerently at me. They were bold birds, ravens, possessed of a savage, bestial cunning, not unlike the soldiers of Genghis Khan they now using as a de facto perch. Nevertheless, in my current excited state, I quickly lost my temper with the thing and swatted violently at it with my arm, my efforts succeeding in dislodging a bird who went flying up into the air. It also succeeded in knocking a dead man's skull from his ancient shoulders, where it bounced lamely over his brethren to land in the middle of the carnage. Immediately, something changed. Suddenly, I was aware that I was no longer alone in this pit. Nothing moved, nothing stirred, but my feeling of sheer, unadulterated terror only hastened in its growth. Something was here, something evil, something old. Frantically, I pulled myself up the cave wall, madly knocking over rib cages and femurs as I sunk my hands into the clay, and when at last I wrenched myself from the gulch that seemed like an abyss, I ran, faster than I ever could recall running before, back towards the safety and security of my private little hamlet. I saw no eyes on this run. Even if I had looked, even if my fear had relented, there would not have been any. The wolves and beasts of the forest surely felt this palpable, creeping horror as I did. How could they not? As I stumbled back down the path into the sight of the village, I remember tripping over a wolf skeleton I do not recall having been there before. As I hurled down the trail back towards the place I had become so familiar with, I began to relax. Surely here I was safe. The people of this village were skilled shots, and whatever was out there would not trouble me here. My fear gradually gave way to exhaustion. What an evening! I could not wait to make use of my find. Tomorrow, I would gather some locals to help me with my excavation, along with one or two of the less ambitious interns, who wouldn't be tempted to publish anything themselves. And of course, I'd hire several gunmen, too, for security purposes. For now, though, rest. I would need slumber so as not to fall victim to this foolishness again. I slept fitfully and had no unpleasant dreams, unless you can say that all that came after was an unpleasant dream. But, for the last time in my life, I slumbered peacefully and well, with not so much as an uncomfortable bump to disturb me. When I awoke, I found myself possessed of new resolve. After a cup of coffee, I would proceed immediately to my find, telling no one. There, I would begin categorizing the bones, listing and enumerating them, preparing to leap from them into eternal fame. I put my muddied coat into the wash, gathered some new clothes and strode briskly out towards the forest edge, where my charisma evaporated. For, dangling from the arbors, were 100 of human bodies, swinging by their guts. Beneath them, the fleshy pink mush that had once been people, now spread around in a nasty, gory carpet, Heads I saw, arms and legs and genitals and eyes. Men, women and children alike had been dissected and made into a gruesome collage. I nearly fell to my knees in shock. No! This could not be! I had to go find someone, alert them. But I spent a quarter of an hour hollering, scouring the place for help, and received no answer. There were an awful lot of bodies up there. Had every single citizen been slain? Outside help. From Budapest. I would go alert the Romanian law. This crime could not go unavenged. A hot-wired, rugged-looking truck. I managed to get it onto the main road, speeding as fast as I could towards help. And it was on this road that the true horror of the morning awaited me. As I rocketed along the black asphalt, I saw a figure ahead of me. Perfect, I thought. Perhaps I could explain to him what had happened. But as I neared, I noticed more of him. He was soaked in mud and wore a black woolen coat, much like mine. As I passed him, gradually slowing, he looked up at my window. It was the face of the old storyteller, but not for very long, for even as I looked at it, it began to change, and slowly at first. But by the time 3 heartbeats had elapsed, I was staring at a familiar figure, one whom I'd saw whenever I looked into the mirror. Only, instead of a haughty, proud expression I was accustomed to wearing, the face gave me a delighted, almost radiant grin. Ah, it seemed to say, did you receive my message? It was then I remembered the full myth of the flesh melder, or of the dormant god, now risen up, whom with one careless stroke I had awakened and sent crawling from the earth again. Flesh that was more than flesh. I stared at my own glittering eyes with horror, not knowing what this being would do next, or where it would go. Only that now, a thing that once had terrorized mankind since its infancy, had returned to our cold and unprepared earth. Since my return to the university, I have not slept a single night. I scarcely eaten, have grown as thin and wiry as a mesh colander. I cannot even drown my sorrow in alcohol like I once could, for I fear that in my inebriation I shall slip up, give this thing and the opportunity it needs to take me unawares. Indeed, I have started seeing it almost constantly. At first it was just my dreams, my fantasies and fears, but now my imagination cannot bear the full blame. During a faculty meeting, I became convinced the table we sat at was the flesh melder in disguise. In one incident that must have cemented my madness in the minds of my colleagues, I thought it was masquerading as a student in my introduction to folk tales class, and ran screaming from the hall to barricade myself in the office. Though I apologized profusely for the incident, I am under close observation from the university staff, who believe me delusional and suicidal after witnessing the deaths of so many friends and co-workers. On one occasion, I attempted to tell someone else what I witnessed, a Freudian who was examining me merely as a formality. During this cross-examination, there was one moment where I tried to divulge the truth of what had occurred, but I paused, for outside at that moment I had just heard a raven caw, unearthing memories as black and as deep as the damp Carpathian mud that first spat forth those skeletons, and so I remained silent and said not a word. The massacre garnered little media coverage. Since many of the dead were found near weapons and firearms, Romanian police have pinned the slaughter on some sort of fanatic religious caliphate or rebel right-wing extremists. Amazing what people will believe. The fascist bullets are responsible for gutting a corpse, or that the macerations that line the crushed skulls of the villagers were the result of knife blades. The authorities brought up this theory when questioning me, and I simply neglected to correct them. I had no desire to give my critics more fodder with which to call my dismissal, and after all, it was of a more than adequate cover. Since the events I have described occurred, a slew of violent uprisings and rebellions have plagued the Balkans, resulting in countless deaths. Madness and murder seem to be slowly engulfing the continent, the work of the flesh melder, I am sure. I've researched this thing for almost 3 months now. I haven't come up with much. Its origins lie firmly in prehistory, and while almost all cultures of note have stories of shapeshifters, none describing anything of this magnitude. I had a thought once, alone in my office, wearing the same blouse I had on for almost a week, smelling of sweat and cheap food and stale perfume. What if the flesh melder was all of it? Every myth, every story, every god ever concocted. After all, it had the power to take on any desirable shape, could kill humans with ease, and in vast quantities. And what is more, it erodes the minds of those who it comes in contact with. It drove those Mongols mad, and it seems to have done the same to me. What if, every time scribes spoke of dragons, they were describing this monstrous thing in one of its forms, setting fire to villages for sport? What if instead of God spreading plagues amongst the Egyptians, it was the flesh melder, murdering firstborn sons just to see what the pharaoh would do? What if every tale and legend I've ever read had been paying homage to this dark monster? And what if the stories I had thought once made us strong merely asserted our position as prey? In my saner moments, I sometimes wonder why the thing hasn't killed me yet. Why it didn't kill me as I slept, unarmed in my hut. I have yet to settle upon a satisfactory conclusion. Perhaps it was grateful to me for waking it. It thought I was its friend. That alone was a horrifying thought. Maybe it wanted a more existential revenge for rousing it from its slumber. But no, the pain I felt now was a fear of madness, grief and guilt. All emotions no God can truly comprehend. Those are the emotions of the prey, the dying. The answer I can't seem to shake is far simpler. All gods desire to be revered and feared, to be sacrificed to be worshipped, that they may reap savagely through the hands of their believers. Otherwise, they are little more than a dream, an idea. What if Flesh Melder had kept me alive because I was its greatest disciple? I had spent most of my life studying its every move throughout history until I finally beheld it. This god about which all tales are written. If my theories were sound, then it had chosen me to be its prophet, to speak of it madly, to write long and wax eloquent on its deeds in the forest, so that those few who had the knowledge of such things could rise and do their master's bidding. But my pen has not until now touched parchment. Even these ramblings would be seen more as a bizarre suicidal note than anything else, and that is if I do not burn them, as I yearn to do. To take the monster with me into the abyss. But part of me knows that a thing, once done, can never be undone. No matter how hard I try to conceal, repress what has happened, I will not consent to being buried for long. This, then, wasn't the story of a battle. It was a creation narrative. This was the very earth, the very mountains cleansing themselves of the upright aberration that was mankind. All humanity meeting its end where reality was weakest. Every movement is a torment for me. My hair is falling out in tufts. The constant clattering of footsteps and branches on windows and floors is excruciating. Which sound will be the last one I hear? I have taken refuge for hours at a time in this church, but it brings me no solace, for I was never the praying sort, and in these long, winding hours, I envy my dead fellows who died before they could learn what I know now, what those old storytellers in the village had always known, what they had tried so hard to hide in the guise of a narrative, to crush, to smother, to destroy. And that this life is a cold and empty thing, and we are not wanted by this earth where we live it. No power saves us on that day when some new foe asserts itself above us on this fickle food chain, and like flies we die, one by one. What was that? Has it come for me at last? I prayed that the case, that I may finally have some peace, some sleep, some mercy. But no, it is a car driving by, and so once again I am forced to take matters into my own hands, to draw the battered old 38 that I never fired, and to at long last lend my face to this beast from hell, to explore the depths of this cold, deep, dark forest, alone. Wow. Wow, absolutely powerful stuff, really intense there. Absolutely loved that one. Thank you so much to the author. Guys and girls, you know the drill. As ever, please do let me know down below in the comments what you thought. Please do like and share. It really does help with the channel and our community further. Of course, don't forget to hashtag TeamFEAR and help us smash our way through the 50,000 subscriber mark. I hope you're all well and happy and had a good Monday. Looking forward to kicking off an even busier and better week. And above all, remember, be safe, not sorry.